Today is a very special episode here on the Sourcing Hero podcast. In recognition of that, I'm joined by Anthony Clervi, principal owner at Una, and Kris Lance, vice president and general manager at Una, to mark, wait for it, the 200th episode of the show by doing a special in studio conversation. So, Kris and Anthony, it's not only great to have you with me, it is great to see you both as we're talking through this conversation.
Hey, good to see you, Kelly.
Glad to be here.
Yep.
Now, Anthony, I want to come to you first. It's been a while. I get to talk to Kris every month, but it's been a little while since we've had on the show. Not
Yeah, you guys let me in the mix here.
But I want to talk about sort of your frame of mind around the podcast. Obviously, you're a proponent, or we wouldn't be doing it.
Absolutely.
You're an active content creator in your own right. But I'm interested in how you see all of those pieces coming together. When we think about creating quality content, but finding the inspiration to be an effective leader or an effective individual contributor, how do those pieces come together for you?
Out of the gate, good question. What comes to mind is just the word authenticity. And when you tie it into leadership, I think of vulnerability as well. When I'm creating content, if any of you have followed me or interacted at all, I'm talking about my marriage, my kids, what businesses I might be involved in, or where I'm traveling. And I've really found that if you're authentic, you're your true self, you're able to connect with your audience, hopefully add value. And then from a leadership perspective, I've always been a big proponent, wherever you are in that leadership journey, try to be as vulnerable with good boundaries as you can. And you're able to really build trust, not only with your audience, but hopefully with your team members, being real, being honest. And it's amazing the impact you can have if you can really be that genuine person as much as you can. And I'm still working on it, trying to be as raw and real as I can.
Yeah.
And connect not only with team members, but the audience that I interact with on all the platforms.
I actually think that connects in a really interesting way to this idea of hitting 200. I mean, it's a milestone because it's a lot. Most podcasts sort of fizzle after 6, I think is the average number. You can pretend to be a character or try to project a persona for 2, maybe 3 pieces of content. 200? Definitely not. And so having a regular cadence, being out there on a regular basis, let alone pushing yourself to be authentic, it's not as easy as people might think it is, right? It
No, it's
takes a
not.
leap of faith. But it is kind of interesting what it forces you to reflect on and think about what you want to share.
If I could jump in, just
Of
what
course.
what AOP and what you have encouraged us here at Una as well is, and I think it absolutely pertains to leadership, is consistency. We're dropping
Yeah.
a pod every Wednesday, and anybody who's in any kind of leadership position, gosh, your team members and folks that you're working with are looking for that consistency. So it absolutely correlates.
Absolutely. Now, as we talk about authenticity, Kris, one of the things that you and I have gotten the opportunity to do, I think we recently figured out it's about 2 years, that every single month you've been joining me to talk about, in some cases, things that almost verge on personal,
Mhm.
to things that are above the fold or maybe have slipped below and people have forgotten about.
Mhm.
But regardless of what we're talking about, it is always evident that you give a lot of thought to what you're reading and how you feel about it and what it means to you.
Mhm.
And so, since we don't have a topic sort of beyond the content creation process itself today, it seems like an interesting opportunity to ask you about how you approach stories, topics, to make sure that how you feel about it is therefore connected to what you say about it, and sort of figuring out where it is and how it aligns with your general values and worldview.
Oof, yeah. Well, my knee jerk. My knee jerk is not too different of an answer from Anthony, right? Because like we were talking about on a different pod, um, the reason people go to pods is for the genuine, the authentic, the real. And so for me, that's usually what I'm after, is what's real. Fortunately or unfortunately, right? I don't typically get that from some maybe main sources, so I set out on my own to try and find what those are. As it also pertains to leadership, I think that actually correlates exactly with what Anthony's doing with content as well, right? Because I think a lot of times leaders, they tend to say, how would I want to be treated? right? And in reality, I think that actually can set you up for failure. I think what you need
Yeah.
to do is you need to really understand your team, and I think that's what's created the culture here that we have at Una. But again, going back to your original question on the topics, right? We do touch on a lot of tough, tense topics that maybe even have competing views within our own organization. So
Mm.
for me, by being genuine, by being authentic, I think people know what to expect from me. And if I'm being very real, that's actually what I love about Una. I look at Una as it's almost like a mini America, right? So there's all these different views, opinions, thoughts, lifestyles, but we're all working together to accomplish the same goal. And so that way, because of that, I'll say it actually allows me to be myself, and I can
Yeah.
speak freely on any topic. And I know that the rest of the team can speak freely on any topic, and we can agree or disagree, but it's always going to be respected. So,
I think that's a great point to call out. There's a lot of talk about corporate culture
mm,
these days, but I think, it's a great idea, but culture is not necessarily a substitute for chemistry.
mm,
So you can try to create a
It's
certain kind
good.
of environment for people to work in, or values or expectations or whatever it is. But if that team doesn't have chemistry and have it in an authentic way, sort of pulling off of what you've both shared, the longevity is just not going to be there.
right.
And fortunately, Anthony, your team has a really impressive track record of sticking around and sticking together. Whether it's because of that authenticity or because it's something through culture and chemistry, what do you think has made it possible for the team at Una to be so cohesive and effective at the same time?
I mean, we're just we're really good about making sure people just align with our values. I know I'm kind of going back to this kind of CEO or cliche, but it's really true. I mean, we have three really simple, but I think highly expected values as it relates to agility, trust, and dealing with change. And we just expect everybody to embrace that, and we're very upfront about it. Through our interview process and even the first 90 days, and continue the bluntness or honesty. If you're going to bark or be a jerk, you're not going to last here long at Una.
Yeah.
I just say that up front. And we've had really even examples and opportunities between Kris and myself and others, not with team members that we just had to say, hey, this just isn't working, which it's always a difficult conversation, but it goes both ways. You want to handle that with grace and professionalism, which we have. And we think about it too, which is even with our members and prospective members and suppliers and partners that we work with, that expectation is not just internal, it's external as well. And so I think we've had a lot of opportunities of failure, but then once our team has seen like, okay, Anthony made a mistake there and he really owned that, or maybe Kris made a mistake. I mean,
Yep.
I stepped in a bucket last week with a team member and had to own it in front of the whole team and had communication and got out of line myself and just being honest.
Yeah.
I just can't emphasize enough the authenticity. And so I think the folks that are here see that it's real, see that I'm still a work in progress, and that there's grace given both ways, and that we have high expectations. But I'd say it to my kids all the time, like Clervi's do what they say they're going to do, and I think Una has that same mantra, and we really try to uphold it every day.
Here, here. Yeah.
Yeah. And it sounds simple, right? But when you talk about those values and then you get around to the idea of like, hey, we're not going to tolerate jerks here.
Yeah.
Maybe that's one of those connection points. I mean, Art of Procurement website, people can take a look on our team values page. Number one team value, no jerks. And so,
Mm.
Phil and I have basically built this whole business up around two ideas. Procurement is awesome,
Yep.
and jerks need not be tolerated.
Well, I like the
And
phrase too, if I could jump in with you,
of
like,
course.
disagree, as you
If
said, but
mm,
just don't be
Yeah,
disagreeable.
right, right.
Gracious.
exactly.
Or
Goodness.
if you're gonna oppose, propose. Like
There you
if
go.
the answer is no, give me something else.
Right.
Like
Don't
yeah,
leave that monkey on my desk.
right,
But allowing that space for disagreement,
right,
right?
Right.
Because if people don't disagree, right? What's the expression? Only a hypocrite is liked by everybody.
Right.
If there's not a space where you can disagree, then you are not getting the best ideas
hmm
because people are holding back. If you're pushing the boundaries, if you've created a safe place for safe exchange of ideas,
Right.
you are going to have people getting worked up sometimes, stepping in buckets sometimes, either literal or otherwise. And if the goodwill is there, then you work through it and you come out stronger on the other side, because none of it is intended.
I think Google did a study looking at all their managers because it's really hard again to find great talent and keep it. It's called psychological safety. I don't think we're
Yeah.
perfect at that, but we think about it. We try to operate in that fashion. And I guess to double down on your previous question, I hope people feel freedom, when they're here,
Yeah.
just to do life and operate within these boundaries. But it's critical, not only internally but externally.
Yeah. Okay, now this is a perfect transition. Speaking of psychological safety, we may be about to bring
Okay.
that into question.
Dun, dun, dun.
Chris, when you and Anthony and I had connected in preparation for this episode, one of the things that came out is an interesting difference between the two of you is that you have very different levels of risk tolerance. So I'm going to give you this one first, Chris.
Okay.
What is your general attitude about risk?
In general, it depends, right? But all joking aside, let me give you a better answer, right? So in my free time on the weekends, I'm actually probably viewed as probably one of the more risky individuals. Things that I do for fun, and I'm not talking about going on a bender in Vegas, right? Just like the activities that I tend to enjoy. Shout out to my 2A community friends and things like that, right? It's pretty risky stuff. We're safe, we're buttoned up, but it's risk, and I'm willing to take it and love it. When it comes to a business sense, I'm just very well aware that nothing that I'm doing is done in a vacuum. And so when I go through the risk, what I'm trying to weigh is not on a risk assessment is not just the risk to myself, right? But it's what are the ripple effects to everybody on the team? How is this
Yeah.
decision going to impact Anthony? How is this decision going to impact sales, marketing, operations, our partnerships, right? And so whether it's a supplier, whether it's an internal external relationship, all of those things in my mind almost have to be weighed because it's not just me on a Saturday morning or a Sunday evening, right? It's something that will carry forward and could directly steer the company or individual lives in a very different
Yeah.
direction. Also, when it comes to big decisions, I'll say, even in my personal life, though, I will pause as well, right? Because what I know about myself is that if I make a decision, right, I tend to always think, what's the worst that could happen? That's the
Yeah.
lens that I look through. I don't tend to look at what's the best that could happen, but because what I know about myself is that the worst happening even if it's just to me could have an impact to how do I respond to that now, and what's that impact going to be to my wife, to my kids, to my coworkers on a Monday when something didn't work out. So again, in general, it depends.
Yeah.
But I tend to look at like the real impact, and I just really try to be honest with myself on what those outcomes could or could not be. So
And I guess for the number of times I've talked to you, it doesn't surprise me,
yeah.
right? You're willing to take risks, but you're thoughtful about it.
Hmm.
You're not talking about like, day old gas station sushi type
Right.
of risk. You're talking about,
Oh,
you know, being thoughtful and understanding what the potential
Yeah.
ripple effects are of something, but not necessarily looking to remain in a bubble,
Hmm.
saying, okay, this is different. How am I calibrated from a risk perspective on this?
Well, and
Um,
if I can, real quick, and
yeah,
I may not like it, but like
true.
my liking it or not, I actually don't weigh I don't weigh into my risk.
Yeah.
Um, I think just being very real on the outcomes though, right? Because there's risk in not taking risk. And so
Yes, there is.
sometimes standing still is some of the most dangerous things that you could do. I would argue in this climate right now, if you're not growing, you're falling behind. And so just because I don't like something doesn't mean that I'm not willing to take that risk. It really has to be like boiled down, and in my mind I have to see that true impact manifest before I can say yes or no. Well,
Yeah.
in a perfect world. Sometimes
Yeah.
we don't get that luxury.
Well, and it's interesting too. I mean, I know you both have kids. I have kids.
Hmm.
Based on what you're describing, Chris, I almost think about that first time you take somebody that's maybe 18 months, 2 years old, right? And you go to the playground and you put them in that little buckety swing with the little leg holes.
Yeah.
Those little hands on the chain, the knuckles might be
right.
white, right? The fear, the terror on their faces. And when you think about that moment, if I can, sort of pull courage into this idea of risk,
Mhm.
being afraid or being anxious about something doesn't mean you don't have courage,
Right.
right? Having courage, having a healthy relationship with risk means doing it
Yep.
anyway.
Yep.
Sometimes it works out and sometimes it doesn't. But if you don't add to that lived experience, you'll never know.
Mhm.
Um, Anthony, if I can pull you in here, where would you say that you and Kris maybe overlap on risk tolerance, or whether it's mindset about it or tolerance for it? Maybe where are you different in some areas? This is an interesting way to get some insight into at least how the two of you connect on the team.
Yeah. Well, I think there's a heck of a lot of value alignment in how Chris and I do life, maybe even at home and just in the business. And I think that helps our conversation, just being honest about that. Just, I think two men, iron sharpens iron. So that comes out a lot. And we've gone through that process very much so, sometimes in certain scenarios, more intense than others.
Hmm.
That's fair, right? And I think too, there's a good, we joke about this maybe yin and yang, where I'm always thinking typically, well, why can't we do that? And Chris is like, well, you're right. I mean, why can't we do that? He thinks that way too, but there's some good stretch. I'm always looking for reach on,
Yeah.
well, I know we may not have all the data we want to support that, but welcome to a small business. Like, I think we should go for it. Worst case scenario, if it works out great, you get all the credit, team and Chris. If it's a mistake, I'll own it. And I think that's been a good back and forth. It's very collaborative. Excuse me. I would say too, as a business, we're fairly, well, no, we're very sound in running how we run our business, our balance sheet, and how we're going to market. And we say a lot like, okay, if we're going to make an allocation, maybe it's an investment in a new product or service, or maybe it's hiring somebody else. Are we focusing on what we can control? And as long as we're thinking about all the things that we can control, sure, there's always going to be something. And
Yeah.
we've got an outside strategic, when we do strategic planning, actually, my father-in-law, shout out to John Chisholm, he always talks about you can never eliminate risk. You can only mitigate it. So we're always looking for ways to mitigate risk and make calculated decisions. But, I think a lot of ways to make sure I'm really answering your question. We just have real honest conversation, whether it's, on a meeting, Zoom meeting, whether it's grabbing lunch or even in writing, which sometimes it even pushes people to articulate their thoughts even more. I think that's really been helpful. And that Chris and the others know, okay, it's not just, all right, if Anthony says we have to do this and this is where we're going, like, no, let's really press through. And we say this often, like, may the best idea win.
Hmm.
And I
Yeah.
really try to uphold that. I know Chris does too, and some of the other great folks in our team.
Yep.
So,
Yeah. No, staying with you on this then, Anthony, because I think this is one of those connection points where, yes, you guys are doing I'm at Art of Procurement, right? But there isn't anybody or any team anywhere in 2025 that's not facing both risk and the need to sometimes make decisions under time pressure
right.
without full consensus. So if you're looking at one of those situations where you've got a lot of opinions in the room, probably a lot of them are valid, you've got different perspectives not only on the situation, but on the options that are being weighed. How do you and the team work through those times so that you don't make sure you have sort of analysis paralysis and open yourself up to that risk Kris talked about of not doing anything? So somebody is still decisive, even though you've created this environment where you want the best idea to win.
Are you asking me?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I would say this is another phrase that it's kind of, I think it's from the military, or I've heard Steve Jobs say, and I know in some ways, maybe, his style, maybe not the best for culture. And I liked a lot of the ways he went about his business, and some of the things I think, again, kind of maybe fall into the jerk column, but I'm a fan of decisions, like, and quickly. And so, yes, mistakes might come from that, but what I don't want is, you know what, if we need help making a decision, gosh darn it, I'll help. But a lot of the times
Yeah.
things don't float up to me unless we're talking a bigger price tag. It's outside of bounds because we've tried to have really good communication, Chris and I, on, bigger decisions that, again, maybe fall outside of what we're already doing on a day-to-day basis, what we know we can commit to, what we know we can deliver on. So we just really encourage an environment. I'll try to say this. I think I even said it this week or last week. I don't know if this is the best idea, but I think we need to make a decision. And
Yeah.
then once we do, like, let's move forward.
Hmm.
Let's not have, again, analysis by paralysis. But also, let's not look back and regret. Like, just move forward. A lot of our phrases, onward, forward. Like, this will work out. It's all good. So,
Yeah. And it's funny as you referenced the military, I was trying to remember the name Tom popped back into my head because I remember one of the earlier sourcing hero conversations we had was with Tom Williams, who's in the
yeah,
military. And one of the pieces of advice he offered up during that show is that almost always the first piece of news to reach you is bad.
Sure.
And so having a sense of timing, you want to be proactive but not reactionary. Wait for clarity, but don't wait so long that the door closes, right? Some of those things that you learn over time and from different kinds of experiences end up with transferable learnings.
Right.
But at the end of the day, there's always sort of that general philosophy that's driving the choices, driving the priorities. And it certainly makes it a whole lot more powerful if all of that is shared across the team.
Hmm. I think ultimately it's just really not about credit or fault. It's just
Yes.
really not. It's just we all recognize that our hands are in the middle together, and sometimes you
Yeah.
can even picture that Captain America meme, like,
There you go.
here we go, Earth, Wind, Fire, right together. Like, we just kind of like all grab hands and take that jump together. But I think that again, like what Anthony was saying, is it's all about. It goes back to even the initial question you were asking, right? It's all about the environment we've allowed to essentially create itself, so that we can have these real frank
Sure.
discussions.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Absolutely. Now, as we really start to sort of dig into the core of this, people that regularly listen to the show will know that, we're always asking that pairing of questions. What does the idea of a sourcing hero mean to you? What does heroism look like in a business context? Now, Kris and I, over the last couple of years, have really had to challenge ourselves because, as much as it would be fun to see if he could keep the answer consistent to that question over the course of 2 years, what we usually do is pause at this point in each conversation and pick a really meaty, almost erring on the side of being too deep kind of question that all of this boils down to. So, we've talked about a lot of values and beliefs and team building and community and all of those dynamics. We've talked about risk. We can talk about why to take it or why to avoid it. We can talk about, to podcast or not to podcast. But each of us typically has an internal value set or a why, as people talk about it, that we line all of those options and decisions up with before we move. So, Kris, as today's deliberately deep, sort of starting to wrap up the conversation question, how would you describe your personal why?
Mm. There's a lot of different ways to answer it, like, and I'm trying to think of like a real catchy, clever way. But if I have to boil it down, my why is my family. I mean, it's every like I wake up and go to sleep thinking about them. It's literally the foundation for every decision that I do make. I wish I had something more clever to say. It really is that simple. But I have a 13-year-old daughter, and I want
Yeah.
to be an example for her to understand that as she grows in life, if you don't like your circumstances, change your circumstances. To not be a victim, push through on difficult things. I have a son. I'm actively working on teaching him to be gentle and calm and
Yeah.
patient. Don't be afraid of the storm. Be the storm. And so those are the things that that I'm trying to live out. And that's not to say that I've not made my fair share of mistakes. Oftentimes, what I look to do as appropriate, though, is share those mistakes as they're ready to understand them, right? So that they don't
Yeah.
repeat them. I know that they will, but hopefully, maybe that the impact will not be as severe, that they can just glean things from me beforehand. But that's my why. It's literally absolutely everything. It's my family. It's my wife. It's my kids. Even my sister, my parents. Right. As I age, I understand the mantle that I'll be picking up and things like that. So my family. That's why I do everything. So
And it's so interesting because we know our kids watch us,
mm,
but we're not really going to find out until later, if we find out, what it was that stuck with them
mm-hmm,
the most, right? Like, we think we're being good examples, like, "Look, I tidied up my spot at the table," or
Right.
"I was polite to that person at the grocery store," when in fact, what they really may remember is that time you were devastated in how you handled it, or a time that you were angry or frustrated or felt stuck. And did you articulate it or did you act out? Did you take a pause and walk away? Right. And
mm-hmm.
so I think that's a fantastic core why. And Anthony, you now have an extremely challenging
I follow that.
question. Now you have to come up with something that beats Kris wanting to leave a legacy and make the world a better place
Well,
through
I'm gonna use the
his family
phrase.
relationships.
Chris is good about this. It's a great reminder. Again, iron sharpens iron, and he and I
Yeah.
are not the only ones doing it in Una, but comparison is the thief of joy,
Yeah.
right? And what's good is, we've got a lot of freedom, I think, not only in our business where we try to, promote that, communicate that, follow through with that. Just to continue to be bold and raw. I think the three biggest decisions in my life that I think about from a why perspective is my faith. My second biggest decision is my partner in life, who I want to stay married to for the rest of my life. I don't want to do it again. My third biggest decision, which I didn't really have a lot of control over, but I'm glad it worked out the way it did, is I have three small children. And to Kris's point, we think about, my oldest is 7. I have 11 more years
Yeah.
with him before he's 18. I've talked about this as strategic planning. So I think about 11 more years, and then it like falls off a cliff on how much the frequency of which I'll see him. And I believe my job as a father is to raise all the kids to make sure that they're independent, they're ready for the world. And I think Kris articulated it well. So I think about that often. And I want, go back into risk and heroes. Like, I I would love them to think of me as a hero. I hope they think a lot about my wife too and what she's doing, and they're observing her because she's so good, so consistent, and we make such a great team together. And I don't know if she'll ever listen to this, but I hope she does. And I need to tell her that more often. But that's a lot of what I think about. That's my why. And I
Yeah.
think business and making money and giving back is a ton of fun. I think you only get one shot on this ball. I'm not coming back as a butterfly or a tree or a famous actor. It's not happening. I don't believe that. And if you do, reach out to me. We can talk about that. But to make the best of what you have, and I genuinely try to think that way. And I hope that my kids and my family and the people that I get the chance to work with, like Kris and others, genuinely feel that. And that's what I think about for my why. And I hope that my actions align with that day to day. And they need to, so because I think it falls into that authenticity and what you're trying to project and portray and how you're giving back. So
Yeah. And you're not just doing it with your family or with the team at Una, but all the other teams that you support,
sure,
right? Phil and I have had the opportunity to work with you. You've been coaching slash consulting slash nagging
cheerleading,
slash
you guys can do
chiding,
it.
cheerleading.
Procurement's awesome.
Yeah, all of the verbs, with us for a while now. And so maybe if I can just push you on this a little bit,
Push
right?
me. All right.
So there's your why and there's your family, right? Next circle out, maybe we expand it to Una for the sake of simplicity. What is it about your core why that makes you want to push beyond that first couple of rings to achieve why at scale, right? Like, why do you care that me and Phil is a stand-in for all of the other companies that you advise? Not just it's never about balance sheet, right? And that's a
Right.
piece of it, but it's about happiness and satisfaction and potential and all of those things. There's clearly something about your why where you're continuing to push that circle outwards to reach even more people than you can through Una.
Well, I think one of the greatest leadership guides is the Bible, and it talks about to whom much is given, much is required. It also talks about using your talents. I think that I still have an opportunity to use all 10 talents. I hope that others think that way too. And so if you can spread hope, it may sound cliche, but if you can say, why can't you do this? Let's go through. There's possibly a limiting belief here. So I
Yeah.
think the experience of helping others uh, surpassed, break through whatever that limiting belief may be, whether it's physical, whether it's in a business, whether it's mental. I don't know if you can see this, but I'm not quite the specimen to get back to that comparison. But Kris and I try to think about, there's a physical approach to how we do life, working out, taking care of our bodies, and I'm usually much better at the top of the year, and I need that coaching as we get into the middle of the year. But yeah, both my parents were teachers, so I wouldn't consider myself the greatest teacher. Maybe I'm the greatest commenter, and I have a high opinion of things. I try to stay within my core competency, but seeing others, okay, I got some nuggets from that, and then to take action on that, I I think maybe there's a dopamine hit on that to see others go to the next level,
Yeah.
whether it's in a business or with the kids, like taking on a challenge and letting them fail and getting through that. So I don't know if it's ingrained in me just with my parents being teachers or I have entrepreneurship on both sides of the family. I guess I just go back to that. Like use all 10 talents. I had a mentor a long time ago that said, use them all, man. Like, what are you
Yeah.
doing? And if you have a way you think you can genuinely add value, um, do it. Because what are you doing, man? And I think sowing in other people's fields, I don't care what you're doing, and it could just be the smallest thing. It's kind of it's just really fun to do. I like doing it.
Yeah. Well, that's enough of a why for me. And
Okay.
actually, we've teased this a couple of times today, but I want to make sure we're sort of saying it overtly so that people don't miss what is really a unique opportunity for us so far. It took us 200 episodes to get in studio on
In
video.
studio, we're here.
Love it.
Yeah, exactly. So for anybody that always listens to the Sourcing Hero because you've subscribed on, Apple Podcasts, Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you listen, first of all, thank you
Yes,
for
thank you.
subscribing.
Yes.
You are the reason that we pre-interview and interview and edit and revise and publish every single week. But this is a unique opportunity to see us talking.
Yes.
And so if you're catching this on a player, it's going to be the video will be on the Una GPO YouTube channel. We know it's going to be embedded in the article on your website, along with sort of the typical link to just listen. But wait, there's more. It slices, it dices, and you could actually have the opportunity to meet with everybody in person, right? Coming up this May at Art of
Yes.
Procurement's Catalyst LA event, which we're psyched to have you guys participating in.
Can't wait to participate. We're going to be a sponsor, and I think this is your first live event, right? Talking about in person.
In
Yes.
person, exactly.
First of many. First of many.
We'll see.
We'll see. Okay.
Let's
That's
let's
honest.
get past
Let's
the
get the
first,
first
and then we'll
one.
figure out all
Okay.
these other ones.
That's
Exactly.
the operator brain in you. Like, all right, we got so
I
much
know.
to do. I get it. I guess it's going to be great. We're excited. I just want to highlight not only everybody that subscribes, you and Kris, connect and do awesome things on a monthly basis, all of our guests, but I want to honor you, Kelly. Thank you for being our gracious host and facilitating and doing so well. You're excellent. We love AOP. We love you and Phil, and we think procurement's cool. We think we do a decent job of knowing where we fit within that procurement world. We're
Yeah.
trying to get better and better each day. And I just want to say thanks and excited to join you guys on this 200th episode.
Yeah, well said. I couldn't say it better. Well said. We appreciate you guys. It's awesome.
Well, we thoroughly enjoy it. We wouldn't do it if we didn't believe in it, if we didn't see the value in it, if we didn't selfishly enjoy it. Sometimes, Kris, way too much. You and I have way too much fun
I think so.
every single month, especially before I hit the record button. But hitting episode 200 is an enormous milestone. There are many, many hands that make this podcast into light work week in and week out. And so congratulations to everybody that's played any role in this. And I guess all I can say beyond that is thanks for being here, and we'll see you at 300.
All righty. See you
Well
soon.
said. Thanks.
Thank you, guys.